was he then spent 10 months in a jail where a process had let him down, and in my opinion, legislation that we had freely signed up to had let down a British citizen. Never forget, there is a victim at the end of this. And I'm very sensitive to that fact. And no doubt the court will pass judgment on Andrew because we finally have a court date. But the reality is, are the victims' interests being served as well if there has not been a thorough examination of the evidence wherever possible? The question of legal aid. Well, it is a requirement that legal aid should be made available. Put simply, it is not in every country made available. You would have thought people would have sat down and said, if we're going to have a system like this that is process-driven, is it not important we ensure people's basic human rights are protected? And the answer to that was, and this is where the post-9/11 rush, in my opinion, led to some serious misjudgments. This is where, in fact, the argument went, yes, we should protect human rights. There should be provisions for Euro bail. There should be provisions for legal aid. There should be, and is indeed written, a provision that every document to a foreign person should be given to them in their national language, all thought of, absolutely thought of. And then, in the rush to secure the legislation, what was actually agreed, even the Council of Ministers at one point agreed it, was that this should all happen. They said, well, you know, every single member of the European Union has signed up to the international human rights. So there are therefore no human rights issues to worry about. One of the most ludicrous judgments, I think, that has led to this rather now jigsaw puzzle, pick and mix, lottery almost, of where you may get a different level of justice system, judicial system, from one country to another. Now, I want to touch on something else as well, because it doesn't actually end at that point. There is also the application of the law from one country to another. Now, as I mentioned earlier, we don't do, and there's probably lawyers here, so I probably apologise if I got this wrong, we don't do what I think is loosely termed as judicial activism. What we actually do is we don't embrace that. So it's unlikely challenges are to be made by our courts. But the reality is the application of it, again, can be different from country to country. So we are undermining this whole concept of mutual recognition that allows, is the basis for assuming the European Arrest Warrant will work. So what about it? What are we going to do about it? Well, as a parliamentarian, and a novice parliamentarian, there is actually, in my own hands, only a limited approach that I can take. The good news is, and I will try and take credit for this, but I'll have to do it with a smile because it's not entirely true. I did have the opportunity to ask a question of the then deputy, the Prime Minister, but he was standing in for the Deputy Prime Minister, and I said, this is not on. And a lot of people in the House agreed. We want a review, and funny enough, he announced there was a review, but I think they'd already worked that one out from previous representations that had been made. Now, this review is not just about the European Arrest Warrant, it's about our relationship with America, which we could talk about at great length, and all our extradition arrangements. I think, and I am concerned, that our hands are slightly tied. I'm going to be watching this review very closely. There are some interim steps that we can take. For example, there were, I believe, 6 or 7 opt-ins that could have provided a level of protection. We only chose one of them under the last government. I imagine that one of the recommendations will be to look in that direction. However, I think we've got to get the review. I hope it will conclude that mutual recognition is failing and that we need a new system to deal with that. I would actually like to see an element of the judgment being made about an individual case. I do not wish to return to the levels of where we had prolonged extradition cases that allowed criminals to defeat the system. I don't think that would be right. That would be a step back. And it may be that we can do that on a different basis, a mutual trust basis within each country. It could be a tribunal, it could be a court dedicated just looking at that level of evidence. But we have to explore new ways, because of one thing I am certain of, and with every breath in my political body for however long that will be, I will continue to oppose this European Arrest Warrant in this or similar form.
I've got to say, in the whole general election campaign, I never spoke to this many people for once. It's so impressive.
And given that we all know that many of these celebrated cases get made or broken by the most prominent case, and we may never have a chance like this again, what can we all do to help you and help your constituents in this battle? Because yours may be the first and possibly the last chance we really have in this fight.
Well, thank you, and let me just record both to Fair Trials International and to Alex, who've been very supportive in fighting what was with one of the tools at our disposal, which was publicity, and I did a good interview. Sorry, that sounds like I'm saying I did a good interview. It was a worthwhile interview to have with Alex on this very subject, to put pressure on getting our government involved in what was the key situation with my constituent at that time. Because just one of the failings was that summonses can be issued from a Greek court that arrive at the Home Office that then should get served to witnesses over in this country, in this case, but in fact, through to process and foul up and everything, mainly through incomplete paperwork at one end, they never got served, so the case got adjourned back in Greece, and that's why we were pressing to have allow Andrew to serve bail back here, and also to try and bring the trial date forward, because his trial date has now been set, Alex, for March the 4th. In between that time now, the parents have agreed that they don't want to press for an earlier trial. They are now preparing for that trial. So I will not be doing any Nick Dubois activism in that sense. What I would call for, and after the case has been settled, is that we have a concerted effort to make sure that this agenda does not get tucked away as the report is being done, and then that the report is just let through Parliament, which people like me will pick up, but we are on top of it as soon as it comes out, because it very much goes to the heart of the rights of the individual and our protection of ourselves and our rights to be judged by our own courts. And I would engage with you and any organisation to put it back on the political agenda at the time that the review comes out. We've done a lot by submitting. I don't know if your organisation submitted or will be submitting anything. I know Fair Trials International submitted. Anyone can submit to the Scott Baker review. The deadline is the 31st of January, which is when my submission will be in there. So that will be the key moment. Write to your MPs, everything. It works, trust me.